You know, I think when I finally reach the big time and I'm a big time syndicated radio co-host with my friend Douglas V. Gibbs, I'm not going to know what to do with myself because I won't be running the show and hosting or co-hosting the show at the same time. Yeah, I'll just be sitting there and talking. I won't have to turn on and off the Jazzme's cam. I won't have to play audio clips. I won't have to technically direct the show as well as host it. That I guess I'll be gesticulating a lot on the UStream feed because I won't know what else to do with my hands, frankly. Welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Hard Starboard Radio Network. At blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network. Holgers? I don't know who Holger is. I don't, never heard of that term. I've heard of Folgers. That used to be a brand of coffee. But Holger? Nope. Is that a character from, like, Middle Earth or something? Yes, the Hard Starboard Radio Network. On this Tuesday, December the 9th, 2014, I'm your host, Jazzme's, your ruler, your benevolent despot, and your fountain rabbi of conservatism, constitutionalism, Christianity, and common sense. Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Guest call-in number is 646-478-5068. Email address jazzme's@comcast.net. The chat room is open and filling up fast, so get in while you can, ladies and gentlemen. And at blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network, there are over 7.5 years, 3/4 of a decade worth of podcasts for your downloading enjoyment, your education, edification, enlightenment, and entertainment in all your life's endeavors, and there's a follow button for you to click. And I want you to click it. Click, 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 click. Click it until your hand falls off. Why? Well, to keep up with what we're doing. If there are any modifications to the show schedule, which is pretty consistent, Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, and now, once again, the Hard Starboard Radio Weekend Podcast is on Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific as well. Of course, to pad my audience and follow numbers to inflate my ego to even more cosmic proportions, and to perchance put Hard Starboard Radio on the main page of blogtalkradio.com as a featured podcast, right alongside another production of the Hard Starboard Radio Network, Featured American Daily Review, a podcast that airs Saturdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific time. It is a kickoff of the Saturday afternoon extravaganza at blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review, and of course, there you will find over 5 years, 5 additional years worth of podcasting brilliance. In the first hour of the Saturday afternoon extravaganza at American Daily Review, I'm joined by my friend, my comrade in arms, my brother from another mother, that Constitution guy, Douglas Vernon Gibbs. And we together listen to him go through the drive-through at the Chinese place next to the palatial studios of KCAA AM 1050, but also we go through, discuss, analyze, and break down the big stories of the week, except for stories 2 and 1, which get saved for the third hour of the Saturday afternoon extravaganza. Also, sometime in hour 2, as opposed to hour 1, Jennifer Crawford joins me. She's my friend of over 20 years from the great state of Indiana, dating back to even before our days on the staff together of RepublicanForum.com. And we talk about whatever we decide to talk about. It's kind of a free-form portion of the Saturday afternoon extravaganza. Kind of dials down the intensities, like a neighborly chat, and it distinguishes that portion of hour number 2 from hour number 1, and also from hour number 3, because as we reach the top of the 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific hour number 3 of the Saturday afternoon extravaganza, the venue changes from blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review, the conga line over the tailgate party, the pregame show, to KCAAradio.com, globally KCAA AM 1050 and FM 106.3 locally, for the flagship program of the Saturday afternoon extravaganza, Constitution Radio with this man. I can say with the utmost confidence, yesterday's will not be the most downloaded and otherwise listened to podcast of this week. Don't forget about yesterday's podcast. But if today's podcast fits that bill, then right now, on the live podcast, Mr. Gibbs's entrance audio is playing. Now, I encourage you to subscribe to and pay attention to and watch and listen to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/hardstarboardradio, where the jazmiest cam footage from the most listened to podcast of the previous week gets uploaded. We also have another YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/American Daily Review 2, the number 2, to which the previous Saturday afternoon extravaganza gets uploaded the following week. So, please, for your own benefit, subscribe to, watch, and follow our YouTube channels, youtube.com/user/hardstarboardradio, youtube.com/user/American Daily Review 2. Constitution Radio with Douglas V. Gibbs on AM 1050 KCAA, KCAAradio.com, KCAA FM 106.3. Located in the Southern California Inland Empire area, the studios, the palatial studios in San Bernardino, and the broadcast towers in Loma Linda, which is, for all you American history trivia buffs out there, is where the Nixon Presidential Library is located. And, of course, Constitution Radio with Douglas V. Gibbs features the regulars, Mr. Gibbs, myself, Alex Ferguson of ConservativeCandidate.com, and Engineer Joe, a bashful Joe these days, who does an outstanding job and takes me, puts me right, whatever the term is, puts me right through when I Skype in. I don't have to wait. I get to listen to the first segment, unless I happen to be part of it on the rare occasions that I do. There's also a top-tier guest, whether national, regional, or local. Last Saturday's guest, well, what turned out to be the only guest was Mr. John Wallstetter, a national security expert, and he went on for two segments. And of course, the other one was supposed to be Judge Andrew Napolitano, a Fox News contributor, and he canceled for last Saturday. We're trying to get him back for this Saturday as soon as I know what the disposition of that is. And if we nail down a replacement date, and if it happens to be this Saturday, I will be sure to let you know. There's the book of the week, the Constitution Quest question of the week, taken from a piece from the game, available at many retail outlets, including ConstitutionQuest.com. And if that's where you go to get your copy of Constitution Quest, the board game, and you do so before the end of this month, December 31st, 2014, and lastly but not leastly, you put the discount code DOUG, D-O-U-G, in the discount field, and then you get 20% off your purchase. So, needless to say, it makes a fantastic Christmas gift. Constitution Quest, the board game. Get it, live it, live it. What is that? Live it, love it, learn it. Learn it, live it, love it. Some combination there, and some alliterative combination. And then, of course, stories 2 and 1 of the big stories of the week. Now, while working several jobs over the past decade, Douglas Gibbs pursued a calling: learning the Constitution of the United States. He objectively researched, dissected, and obtained illumination from each and every word in that historic document. His calling led Doug into Internet radio, the political pistachio radio revolution, which evolved into Constitution Radio, where he spoke on political news topics of the day, all the while using their events, or those events to illustrate the wisdom inherent in our founders and the Constitution itself. A humble man, Doug was soon asked to teach classes about the Constitution, and later to guest on other shows, then on cable network news programs, like Fox and Friends twice, like Sean Hannity, like Al Jazeera, like National Public Radio. You know, the Squidward Tentacles channel. It's hard to believe he was once turned... Well, actually, it's not hard at all to believe that he was once turned down as a guest on a legal show, because the fact of the matter is, the Founding Father intended all of us to be the guardians and gatekeepers of the United States Constitution, not just the Supreme Court. Everybody. And in fact, it's really telling that the notion of someone without a law degree discussing the Constitution is considered ludicrous and demeaning to the legal profession, because that's a bass-ackward state of affairs, folks. Mr. Gibbs is gregarious, earnest, and masterful in his ability to use current world events to help us all better understand this most historic document that defines structure of the branches of government within our republic and ourselves. Liberty Tree Media Group will be proud to market Constitution Radio with Douglas V. Gibbs if they can ever get around to it. Check out www.douglasvgibbs.com and his incredibly popular blog, on which I core dumped 6 more posts with 3 more to come after the program today. politicalpistachio.com. By the way, for those of you who prayed for my dad and his cataract surgery yesterday, it went off without a hitch, and everything's fine, no matter what my aunt might think. I'll tell you what, there are things that you'll take from your parents, even when you're 50 years old and they're in their 80s, that uh, you won't take from any other relative, even of the same advanced years. I guess that's all. All I really have time to say about it. But the cataract surgery went well, and my dad is on the road to recovery and to regaining his Agent Barton-esque eyesight. They did the left eye, so the right eye still remains to be addressed, but that will be not in the immediate future. I don't know why they do both. I don't know why they do one at a time rather than both at once, but that's the way they do it, so that's what we'll work with. And hopefully I've gotten my aunt squared away to where she won't be getting on my back about certain things again. Now, now this is an item in the stack that I've had in the stack, but it's been at the bottom of the stack, for weeks. But the subject matter is still just not directly current events related. It's more a case of looking ahead at the big picture, which is why it's still relevant and will be relevant, especially as the months unfold and we move into the 2016 presidential election cycle, assuming there is a presidential election, assuming Barack Obama allows it. This is Stephen Moore at the American Spectator. I'll finally get this tab off my screen after today, but it's got some very sage advice. See, war is the theme, kind of today's program, because I got tired of talking about rape culture. In fact, I got a post up at politicalpistachio.com today about ISIS, the Quran, and sex slavery. So if Lena Dunham and Rolling Stone magazine want to hear about a real rape culture, then go to the main page at politicalpistachio.com today. You will learn more about genuine rape culture and which culture it is that actually practices it than you ever thought possible. Of course, that's assuming that the left were capable of learning anything, even of admitting error. And of course, everything they do is wrong anyway, and they don't abandon it, which in turn it strongly and powerfully implies their underlying malevolence. But I digress. No, this is this first item on the stack fits with that theme of war. This is the GOP Civil War. And it's funny because the media, the left, pardon the redundancy, they always used to always talk about, the GOP Civil War is about ready to erupt, and it never did. And then along came the Tea Party, and then it became a reality. What the heck? Oh, for crying out loud, the browser just crashed. Browser just crashed, folks. I don't know if talking about GOP Civil War had anything to do with it, but so yeah, then the Tea Party came along, and all of a sudden, the Republican Civil War became a reality. And I've talked about this on many an occasion about how see, I am a referee. That's how I look upon myself. I'm one of those people. I've never been an establishmentarian. But I've never been a tighty-righty either. I've always subscribed to the Buckley rule. Bill Buckley used to say, support the most conservative candidate who is electable. If you just go in terms of total purity fetishism, and nominate somebody that can't win, then not only are you wasting your time, but you're betraying your own cause. Whereas if you have somebody like if you're in a red state, a perfect example of it was the Mississippi GOP senatorial primary back in the spring. Remember Chris McDaniel? He was the Tea Party candidate, and Tad or Thad, however he pronounces it, Cochran, who was more than happy to use Democrat votes in an open GOP senatorial primary to get around Chris McDaniel. That was a perfect example of a case where you had an establishmentarian and you had a quality Tea Party-backed candidate. And so, go for it, Tea Party-backed candidate. Or go for it, Tea Party-er. See, that's the thing. The message that I push, that I preach, is we are stronger together than apart. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said, we must all hang together or we shall surely all hang separately. And it's no different today, equivalently speaking, in the early 21st century in the GOP. We've got to hang together. We all need each other. The Tea Party needs the establishment. The establishment needs the Tea Party. The Tea Party provides the energy, provides the foot soldiers, so to speak, the army, if you will, and the establishment provides the money, and they provide the political expert, and most especially the electoral savvy and expertise. Because politics is a profession, politics is a business. It always has been, going back to the beginning of the Republic. Let's see here. Oh, that's funny. Oh yeah, that American Spectator has that habit. The habit of sticking autoplay ads on your screen, and it just comes on the screen, and then when it's done, it just disappears again. But at least it's done. Funny how I didn't hear anything. Hope everybody can hear me still. Hey, test in the chat room. Can everybody hear me? Yep, apparently so. At any rate, like I say, the establishment provides the electoral expertise and resources, and the Tea Party provides the energy and the ideological fervor. So, they both need each other. The establishment needs the Tea Party needs the establishment. And that's pretty much the argument that Steve Moore makes as well in this American Spectator piece. At a recent small dinner at the end of the fabulous Freedom Fest gathering at the Paris Hotel in Las Vegas, major supply-siders, libertarians, Tea Partiers, and traditional conservatives gathered to discuss strategies to regain political power in Washington, assuming Barack Obama allows it. The libertarian faction fumed with the familiar complaint that the GOP will only win back young and female voters in 2016 by abandoning social issues like abortion and sado marriage, which would in effect toss the evangelicals off the bus. Yet this has also become a common recommendation from the country club Republicans as well, who may not be members of the Tea Party movement, but who write the big checks. The ones that they're digging out their wallets and are gonna dig deep into them to try to foist Jeb Bush, Chris Christie, or Mitt Romney on us in 2016. Which, by the way, that shouldn't be news to anybody. That's who they are. That's what they believe in. And you know what? This notion that some Tea Partiers have that they're entitled to win is. They still, they better learn. It's been 4 years now. They better learn that no, they're not entitled to win. The establishment gets to contest GOP primaries, certainly the GOP presidential nomination, This is where I say, and Stephen Moore here gets to it. In fact, no, it's not Stephen Moore. It's Quinn Hillier gets to it in the next item on the stack here. That what the Tea Party has to learn is stop pumping the GOP presidential primaries full of conservative candidates, largely unelectable flakes who are the flavor of the month. That's why Mitt Romney coasted to the nomination in 2012, after all. That's precisely what he did. He coasted to the nomination because you had Michelle Bachmann, you had Rick Santorum, you had Newt Gingrich, you had Herman Cain, you had all these different people who didn't have a prayer, were not presidential timber, were not going to get the nomination. But Tea Partiers just love them because they represent. It's exactly what the pet peeve that I say so often, that I bitch and moan about so often. That just because you hear somebody give a speech and you agree with them 100% all the way down the line does not make them a presidential timber. There's so much more to it than that. And you know what it is. You have to have the right resume. You need executive experience. You need charisma. You need courage. You need resources. It's so much more than just, I agree with that guy. He should run for president. It's like the draft Ben Carson for president movement, which just makes my teeth grind because all that would do would make Dr. Carson the Herman Cain of 2016. Ben Carson, if he's ever going to be president, has to get some political experience, preferably gubernatorial experience, because there's no such, for all that outsiders and citizen politicians are glorified on the right, those are myths. Outsiders, by and large, do not win, and there's no such thing as a citizen politician. There never has been, ladies and gentlemen. The quicker the Tea Partiers figure that out and learn it, and it's just a reality. It's not a question of, well, let's choose this. That's just the way it is. It's like arguing with the fact that the sky is blue and the clouds aren't blocking access to it. That's just the way it is. Politics is a business and a profession, so when you're going to talk about country club Republicans may not be members of the Tea Party movement, but they write the big checks. Well, they get to write the big checks. They get to contest primaries too. If Tea Partiers want to win these primaries, they got to get more resources and they've got to put up better candidates. It's that simple. The Tea Party is not entitled to win GOP primary. Now, of course, neither is the establishment, and that would bring us back to Thad Cochran and the underhanded means that he used to get around Chris McDaniel, because, and this is why I am a staunch advocate of closed primaries. A party primary is supposed to be a primary of that party's voters. And if the Mississippi GOP senatorial primary had been limited to just Republican voters, Chris McDaniel will be in the United States Senate today. But I digress. Let's see. We must have a truce on the social issues. It's turning off voters, complains one prominent Wall Street financier that raises money for the party. By truce, he means, of course, surrender. Even though there's no evidence of that. Regardless of how one feels about these social issues, does anyone honestly believe the GOP can put together a winning coalition without the reliable voters and activists who make up around 40% of the party? Will replacing a pro-life platform protecting the sanctity of the unborn with, say, one on drug legalization make the big tent bigger? Turns out Mitt Romney did a pretty good job of de-emphasizing social issues, and look where that got him. Several million white evangelicals stayed home, foolishly. You know, let's not excuse those several million white evangelicals who stayed home in 2012. I sure as hell didn't. You know, this idea of, I didn't get the candidate I want, so I'm going to stay home. That's idiotic. That's retarded, frankly. Grow up. You do the best you can. You don't just stay home and surrender the country to Barack Obama for 4 more years. So these several million white evangelicals are in no small part, at least partially responsible for Barack Obama still being president today. How is that better? I don't get it. Never have. This is an especially misguided political strategy given that the electorate is becoming more, not less, pro-life over time. A Gallup shows the electorate split almost evenly today at 46% pro-life, 47% pro-abortion, compared to 41-51 8 years ago, or 33-56 in 1995. The issue may be a net plus for the GOP in most states outside of liberal bastions like California and New York, places that Republicans aren't likely to win anytime soon, if ever again, anyway. Now, in fact, I would propose an altogether different strategy. Pull together the old Reagan coalition, which is still unbeatable when united. To borrow the immortal words of John Belushi and the Blues Brothers, it's time to put the band back together. Liberals can't win a majority when this coalition holds. Add up the Americans who identify as libertarians or conservatives, and you get 56% to just 34% who call themselves liberals. Although those ideology identification polls, I never really pay a whole lot of attention to them. Because you would get the impression from that well, if the American people are that conservative, why don't they vote that way? There's the rub. At any rate, pursuing this fusion strategy may not be, as Dan Aykroyd put it, a mission from God, but undoubtedly the highest priority for conservatives, free marketeers, libertarians, and everyone else who wants to grow the economy and shrink the government is to defeat Elizabeth Warren in 2016, because it ain't going to be Hillary Clinton. A Pocahontas victory would cement in place and validate all the havoc and transformation that Barack Hussein Obama, assuming, of course, that he ever voluntarily relinquishes power, and Harry Greed and crazy Nancy Pelosi have inflicted on America. It could swing the Supreme Court to the left for 2 decades or more, meaning those 5-4 and 6-3 decisions will start tilting irretrievably against us. In short, Elizabeth Warren victory will be a colossal setback. The fact that Mitt Romney lost in 2012 only doubles the stakes in 2016. Now, of course, I'm of the considered opinion that 2012 was the Rubicon, that was the last chance, and the Republic is already doomed and it's already dead, as we're going to be seeing more and more over the next couple of years. But if you want to be an optimist, if you want to be optimistic about things, now's the time to do what's necessary, if it can be prevented, to prevent Elizabeth Warren from becoming the 45th President of the United States. Did I mention Scott Walker is my guy? Governor of Wisconsin. 2 terms. Tea Party executive. I mean, it's best of both worlds. A fight guy who's not going to intimidate or not going to frighten anybody, not going to frighten the middle, the mushy moderates, independents, if you will. So why are all the guns in the center-right coalition aimed at one another and not against the Death Star that is the modern Democrat Party? Well, you know what, Mr. Moore? That's a question I've been asking myself for years. I've been asking and posing that question for years because it just never made any sense to me, and it still doesn't. I don't understand this Polish firing squad. It's a mystery to me. Kind of squabbling that Moore saw in Vegas between social conservatives and libertarians is breaking out all over these days. The Chamber of Commerce is at war with the Tea Party, and both factions are spending money to defeat the other's candidates. The conservative super PACs have waged a war against Republican congressional leaders Mitch McConnell and John Boehner. Once upon a time, conservatives, including Mr. Moore, declared war against real tax and spend rhinos like Arlen Specter and Link Chafee. Remember that? Remember when there really were rhinos? You know, it's almost, in a sense, it's almost like the civil rights movement and the feminists, in that once they've won the war, they still have to find an enemy to fight so that they can remain relevant, retain their wealth and revenue streams and influence. And so if there's no more genuine rhinos, well, we'll just smear Mitch McConnell and John Boehner with that label and continue and just continue to initiate the process of burning down the Republican Party, which I don't understand how that helps the conservative cause, frankly. Ronald Reagan understood that. Remember, after he narrowly, agonizingly lost to the GOP nomination in 1976 to President Gerald Ford, and there were a lot of Tea Partiers of his day who were urging him, begging him to run a third-party spoiler candidacy that would have given Jimmy Carter a landslide and probably would have made, it would have buried the GOP for who knows how long. Reagan didn't do that. Why? Because he knew the GOP was the only national political vehicle, an electoral vehicle for the conservative movement. I mean, if not for the Republican Party, would we hold the Senate today? In the beginning on next month, on January 9th, a month from today, as a matter of fact. No, we would not. We need the GOP. So the Tea Party needs the GOP. The establishment needs the GOP, which means the establishment and the Tea Party both need each other. Why can't we all just get along? Now some people's litmus tests are so strict that a lifelong conservative like Mitch McConnell is judged impure. Now, I'm not buying where Mr. Moore is going on these next two. He says, Jeb Bush, one of the most innovative free market reform governors of the last 2 decades, is denounced as too moderate at Tea Party events. When Moore wrote a column earlier this year defending former Republican House Majority Leader Eric Cantor for his effective leadership in budget negotiations against Barack Obama in 2011 and for helping bring down the deficit from $1.4 trillion to $400 billion, Moore was attacked as a sellout and a member of the establishment. His colleague Dan Henninger at the Wall Street Journal tells him that he gets similar rant emails from Tea Party conservatives. Wait a minute, he replies, I'm one of the original Reagan Republicans. That's not good enough? Well, I guarantee you the word that Stephen Moore is not saying here is amnesty. Yeah, amnesty is what we're talking about. Jeb Bush is big for amnesty, and he's big for Common Core, which is why conservatives can't stand him. And Eric Cantor, what did Eric Cantor go down ultimately? What brought him down? Why did he lose his primary? Because he supported amnesty. I mean, that's the schism that's tearing through the GOP at the moment. I posted about it last week at politicalpistachio.com about the toothless anti-amnesty resolution that the House Republicans passed while they were terrified of actually defunding Barack Obama's illegal amnesty decree because they're terrified of a government shutdown. They think no matter what happens, no matter what they do, no matter how favorable the PR ground, that they'll still lose anyway. Even if you were deliberately trying to damage yourself in PR terms, wouldn't now be just the time, precisely the time to force a government shutdown? Because there's 2 years until the next election, right? There is no better time on no better issue when 3/4 of the American voting public is with us than to have a confrontation with Barack Obama, and especially given the fact that he's implementing it as fast as he can. There's no better time than right now to have it out, to have this showdown on Barack Obama's illegal amnesty decree. There's no better time than right now. For any number of different reasons, and we would win. But you can't convince the GOP leadership of that. It's like battered wife syndrome. They're just convinced they're going to lose no matter what they do. Makes you wonder, well, why did Boehner and McConnell run for re-election then? I mean, they're not caving on immigration per se. They're just they are terrified of what it would take to actually stop Barack Obama's amnesty drive. I don't know what else to tell you. Now, even on the economic issues, though, dangerous fissures have appeared. A group calling themselves Reform Conservatives has sprouted up with some ostensibly good ideas about regulation and welfare reform, and some horrible ones about tax policy. One plan being floated would increase the child tax credit to help families with children, but marginal tax rates would have to rise to pay for it, which is, I resist that terminology. You don't have to pay for tax cuts. That very term, because it implies that tax cuts are a subsidy. No, they're not. You can't do anything with money you haven't taken. You haven't confiscated. With tax revenue you haven't levied. One plan being floated would increase the child credit to help families with children, but I already did that. Covered that. The New York Times has written fawningly, which says a great deal, about reform conservatism. To supply-siders, it is exactly the wrong way to go on tax reform. And when it comes to tax policy, the reformers' agenda ignores the primary economic lesson of the past 40 years, namely, lowering tax rates ignites economic growth. Tax rates matter most at the margin and on the last dollar earned, and credits and deductions are deadweight losses. This isn't dogma, it's economic history. It's fact. The problem for the middle class today is not that their income taxes are too high. It is that their incomes are not growing. In fact, they're shrinking relative to inflation. The middle class has been flattened financially over the past 6 years, and putting more money in their pockets won't make up for $2 trillion of lost growth. And you wonder why no jobs have been created and continue to not be created. And when I mean jobs, I mean real jobs, private sector jobs, full-time jobs, decent paying jobs. What is worse is the idea of taking millions more families off the income tax rolls entirely. Currently, about 4 out of 10 Americans pay no income tax, and that could grow to more than 5 out of 10 under this new tax plan. This smacks of representation without taxation. The better way to go is to ensure that nearly everyone, except the very poor, pays at least some income tax. But everyone pays a manageable rate. If the party intellectuals are looking for something to really electrify voters, something like Herman Cain's 999 plan will be a far more potent than a child tax credit. Of course, there's nothing wrong with airing out different ideas in a presidential primary campaign, But the core principle of prosperity-based tax reform that should unite us all is broad base, low rates. April Panuru, a prominent reformicon, says that Republicans have nothing to say to a mother with 3 kids in the bottom half. Yes, we do, April. It's called growth and opportunity, which come from businesses and jobs, which come from things like supply-side tax cuts. These dots aren't that hard to connect. The challenge is to fuse a winning coalition united against a common and dangerous enemy. Saying that the GOP can't win with the Tea Party or with the pro-lifers or with the business wing is short-sighted. Those who think it's hard to win with these groups ought to remember how painful it is. Oh, yeah, that's not what I was. Oh, sorry about that. Ought to remember how painful it is to lose without them. Show of hands, everybody. What do you think of the slogan for 2016, Run, Mitt, Run? Well, now, I mean, I know the instinctive reaction that creates among conservatives. I'll rummage around and find it somewhere here. Yeah, this is the typical reaction to "Run, Mitt, run!" But Quinn Hillier is chanting it, and there's a method to his madness. It basically works like this. The more establishmentarians, the better, if a true conservative is to win the nomination. Or let's put it another way. It's the reverse of what happened in 2012. In other words, this time, let's flood the zone with moderate or rhino candidates, and all the while we are unifying behind one conservative champion. And you know who I'm talking about, don't you? Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. I mean, think about it. The opposite is how the GOP nominating process always works. There's a flood of conservative candidates, one overarching moderate, and the conservatives just fracture and split up the right-wing vote, and meanwhile the overarching moderate just coasts to the nomination. I mean, it happens again and again and again and again. Let's reverse that process, argues Mr. Hillier. Now, I'm not, Quinn Hillier is a tidy-righty of long tenure and standing. And I haven't always seen eye to eye with Quinn Hillier, but I think he's on to something with this idea. With a spate of stories emerging in recent days that Mitt Romney seems likely to run yet again for the presidency, the first reaction of many conservatives is, well, you just heard it here moments ago. Well, that and please go away. Upon further reflection, and with a caveat, I'd like to say, run, Mitt, run. The reason conservatives should want Romney to run is that we need as many establishment types as possible to run for the Republican nomination. We need more moderates to run and fewer electable conservatives to run, because Republican primary arithmetic favors the side of the right-center divide that produces fewer truly electable candidates. Presidential primaries, at least for the first 15 or 20 states, usually are won not by majorities, but by pluralities. And pluralities are won by having one candidate who splits an identifiable strain of voters with as few other candidates as possible. Or better yet, with none. The establishment rallied behind John McCain in 2008. Romney, Fred Thompson, and Mike Huckabee all ran to, well, Huckabee didn't run to his right. If anything, Huckabee ran to McCain's left, but I digress. And with Ron Paul also taking the libertarian right, further diluting conservative votes. McCain won fewer than 40% of the votes in New Hampshire, fewer than 35% in South Carolina, about 35% in Florida and Oklahoma, and fewer than 40% in Missouri, to list the most heavily contested early-ish states. But he won pluralities and thus was declared the victor in each. Most of the time, winner-take-all rules. This also meant that he grabbed the bulk of the delegates in each of these states. On the strength of those early pluralities, he grabbed the cloak of inevitability for the nomination. In 2012, Mitt Romney won small pluralities, while the clearly more conservative, but totally unelectable Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich repeatedly split up well over half the votes in each contest. I mean, I thought we were talking about electable conservatives there, Mr. Hillier. In any case, Romney hobbled to a nomination that fewer than half of Republican voters wished him to get. As it was, just 23,000 votes in Romney's home state of Michigan and only 10,000 a week later in Ohio kept Santorum from knocking Romney out of the race, which would have been an even bigger disaster than Romney getting the nomination, even with Gingrich siphoning large percentages of votes directly from Santorum. Clearly, if conservatives had been more unified and establishmentarians more fractured, those nominations would not have gone to McCain and Romney. Although I'm not sure, they would have gone to Romney and who? Answer that question, you start figuring things out that maybe this strategy isn't always the best idea. This year, somehow, we who want to see an electable movement conservative take the nomination should therefore want as many establishmentarians as possible to run. We should want Romney and Jeb Bush and Chris Christie and perhaps Peter King and George Pataki and Lindsey Graham all to run, all out, while only one or two solid conservatives split the majority of Republican voters on the more rightward side of the spectrum. Scott Walker, Scott Walker, Scott Walker, Scott Walker. It's particularly true that Romney and Bush pulled from many of the same sorts of backers, and that if only one of the two of them runs, that one candidate will have a major advantage in the event that Mike Pence, Bobby Jindal, and Scott Walker, to name, well, 3 possibilities, all vie for the conservative slices of the electoral pie. It should then warm conservative hearts to see it reported that Romney does not feel he owes the Bushes anything and does not think Jeb is the de facto leader of the establishment GOP. This Romney-Bush rivalry, if it continues to develop, could provide an opening for a conservative to win pluralities while two more familiar names battle each other. Of course, some of us would prefer that neither of them run. Part of it is philosophical. Bush's fondness for amnesty and Common Core and Romney's pudding-like right-centerism are both major turnoffs. Part of it is the desire for new blood. And remember, Romney embraced amnesty as well, if you were listening a couple of weeks ago. Part of it is the desire for new blood. The same families that were in the news nearly weekly in the fall of 1968, nearly a half-century ago, have dominated Republican politics ever since, and this sends the wrong signal to the electorate. Okay, I wouldn't mind another Reagan, but when a Bush, a Dole, a Romney, or a McCain are still at or near the top of the Republican totem pole for the next 46 years, it really does make our side look tired and worn out, like an enervated ruling class desperately holding on to eroding perks. Part of my dislike is about tone. Bush has far too often been almost insultingly dismissive of conservative concerns on numerous issues, while Romney can't make an appeal to manual laborers to save his life. And part of the particular antipathy to Romney is the outrageously poor messaging of what should have been an eminently winnable campaign in 2012. All the reports in the past year have indicated that Romney never really believed he would beat Obama, and it showed in his campaign. He was, of course, the single worst possible Republican candidate to make the case against Obamacare, which should have been the campaign's biggest single issue, but he never really tried. He should have pounded home his criticism of Obama's of Obama's malevolence and lies related to the Benghazi atrocity, but he got scared off by Candy Crowley. Which, aesthetically speaking, it's hard not to be scared by Candy Crowley. By the way, she's out at CNN, in case you didn't notice that in the news yesterday. And Romney should have resisted the terribly ill-advised urge to go way overboard with his attack on Obama's "you didn't build that" idiocy. But because Romney doesn't fully understand that workers as well as entrepreneurs should make up the Republican base, he allowed that attack line to become a parody of itself. On top of all that, there is this fact. Aside from Richard Nixon, nobody has ever won the presidency after losing a previous election as one nominee in a two-major party system since Thomas Jefferson returned from his 1796 defeat to take the White House in 1800. And Nixon had two unique advantages. First, many people rightly thought he had been robbed in 1960, and second, he benefited from a major ideological split among Democrats. Remember Hubert Humphrey and Eugene McCarthy? If not for that, Nixon would probably have lost in a landslide. Like if it had been Robert Kennedy, if Bobby Kennedy hadn't been assassinated in June of that year, we would have seen the resumption of Camelot, ladies and gentlemen. And who knows how the history of the past half century would have unfolded. With no clear philosophical mission, no claim of having had an election stolen from him, and no other anomaly, well, there are those of us who believe the 2012 election was stolen, but it'll never be proved, and no other anomaly working to his benefit, Romney is not any more likely to beat the Democrats in 2016 than he was in 2012. For all those reasons, then, conservatives should not want Romney anywhere near the nomination. But as explained above, the best way for one of our own to get the nomination is probably for Romney to join Bush in seeking the nomination that neither one ought to win. Maybe, but the British have an expression, folks, too clever by half. The Hillier strategy seems to fit that bill, I think. We'll be right back. Final hour of the week before we head into the weekend and tomorrow's Saturday afternoon extravaganza, kicking off at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. At blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review, and climaxing, no pun intended, with Constitution Radio with Douglas V. Gibbs, and don't forget, 2:15 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 5:15 on the East Coast, Judge Andrew Napolitano will be the featured guest, along with his book, and I haven't memorized it now. No, it's over. And his book, Suicide Pact, the radical expansion of presidential powers, and the assault on civil liberties. So that is now, what's it down to? Actually, it was 20 hours and change. Now it's 19 hours and 52 minutes from now, folks. So you won't want to miss it. And let me just tell you something. Those of you who tune in American Daily Review, follow us over to kcaaradio.com. If you're not listening to the flagship... Let me start that again. If you're not listening to the flagship program, the Saturday Afternoon Extravaganza, Constitution Radio, Douglas v. Gibbs, you are missing at least a third of the show. So follow us over. Enjoy the entire Saturday Afternoon Extravaganza. Tomorrow, Judge Andrew Napolitano is the blockbuster guest. You won't want to miss it. Now, Bruce Thornton at the Hoover Institution had some thoughts on this as well, but he puts it in a broader context, namely the death of feminism. And it's more like intellectual suicide. You know, California recently passed a law requiring that sexual encounters between students in universities and colleges can only proceed on the basis of affirmative, conscious, and voluntary agreement. Failure to resist or to ask the partner to stop the encounter can no longer be taken as consent. So in other words, the woman can just retroactively redefine any sexual encounter as rape, quote unquote. Oh, there's nothing sexually unjust about that for the male of the species, now is there? You know, if you go out on a date with a gal and and she jumps your bow, and you don't have to ply her or suggest anything. She willingly participates, and then after the fact, she accuses you of rape. You're screwed. No pun intended. Isn't that the logical outcome of that particular state of, well, affairs? Again, no pun intended. Institutions that wish to receive state funds or financial aid must adhere to this standard when investigating charges of sexual assault. The phrase redefined to include behaviors once considered boorish or insensitive but not legally actionable. And here again, if failure to resist or to ask the partner to stop the encounter can no longer be taken as consent, then what meaning do the terms affirmative, conscious, and voluntary have? I mean, from the male, I can say, now I've never played the field, I never slept around before marriage, I've only been with one woman ever, my wife. But it seems to me, from the male perspective, that if your partner, on a particular occasion, gives every indication of affirmative, conscious, voluntary agreement, and then can just completely change the story after the fact and get you accused of rape, then something's not right here, and what's more, something is not just. The California law follows on the 2011 Department or Commissariat of Education's Office of Civil Rights Dear Colleague letter that instructed schools investigating sexual assault complaints to use the more likely than not or preponderance of the evidence standard of evidence rather than the clear and convincing one. In other words, you don't really have to have any evidence at all. She said is all that matters, apparently. You know, a lot of this could just be totally avoided by heeding the advice that my dear old mom, God rest her soul, gave me before I went off to college at Washington State University, which at the time was the #1 party school in the nation. She said, and I quote, "Keep that thing in your pants." Very, very sage advice, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, you know, you can't have a sexual revolution. You can't encourage rampant promiscuity and fornication. You can't wage war on the institution of marriage and not expect a lot of, well, boorish and insensitive behavior to be the result. I mean, if men are inherently the sexual predators that feminists never seem to tire of depicting, then why would you push a sexual ethic or lack thereof, a sexual ethos, that logically would encourage just that kind of behavior? And this is another one of those ear-bleeding issues for me. Far be it for me to apply logic to left-wing reasoning, but still. The dangers to individual privacy and accountability that follow such regulatory intrusions into sexual intimacy. Remember when the left said, stay out of our bedrooms, in the context of abortion? But now that the state's supposed to come right into the bedroom when they have the opportunity to accuse a male of the species of rape. It's amazing. Women are supposed to have apparently all the sexual power. All of it. Men are not supposed to have any sexual power. I mean, this is about two steps at most away from just passing a law requiring all male Americans to be chemically castrated. I mean, isn't by this supposed logic, isn't that the ultimate end game? I mean, after all, the male of the species can't commit rape if, well, they can't get it up, right? Or am I missing something? So the dangers to individual privacy and accountability that follow such regulatory intrusions into sexual intimacy between legal adults, remember consenting adults, remember that concept, have been well documented, and not the least being the violation of the rights of the accused who now enter a hearing with a presumption of guilt rather than of innocence. Again, this is not about justice, this is about revenge. This is about power, which is the only coin in the left-wing realm. Also problematic is the double standard inherent in such rules, particularly when both accuser and accused are drunk or otherwise incapacitated. But the main problem with the California law is the corruption of feminism that it represents. When it comes to sex, and now we're back to the condom commercial. When it comes to sex, the old feminist claim to equal treatment based on a woman's equal capacity to control her sexual choices has been transformed into an old-fashioned Victorian notion of women as weak creatures who need to be protected from sexually feral males, and who lack agency and thus should not be held accountable for their own choices. How convenient. Another one-way street, as every street in the liberal city is a one-way street, folks, sooner or later. The feminist championing of sexual autonomy for women reached a head in the 1960s. Before the modern age, sex was seen as a necessary but dangerous force that, if left uncontrolled, not just impaired the mind, but also destroyed whole civilizations. It was the illicit sexual passion of Paris and Helen that burnt the topless towers of Troy, as Christopher Marlowe wrote. As such, sex had to be contained and channeled by social practices and cultural institutions. Virtues, taboos, and especially marriage all attempted to direct sexual energy to its most socially important goal, procreation and the family. Oh, by the way, it just came out today that the U.S. birth rate last year was the lowest ever. It is below the replacement rate, which means, yes, our culture, if you didn't already know, our culture is officially dying, because a culture that doesn't replace its population is dying, well on its way to death. Demographics is destiny, as Mark Stein likes to say. Now, Christianity inherited these assumptions and put them in the context of the theology of man's fallen. Well, we didn't inherit them. They came from God. That's where everything comes from originally. God. God created these strictures. Christianity administered these assumptions and put them in the context of the theology of man's fallen nature and the need for the soul to be redeemed from the passions of the transient body, among other things. By the late 19th century, many social and cultural developments had undermined this traditional sexual realism. Over the following decades, in the work of Richard von Krafft-Ebing, Sigmund Freud, Margaret Mead, Alfred Kinsey, Masters and Johnson, Norman O. Brown, Herbert Marcuse, and numerous others, sex was removed from the context of religion, custom, and taboo, and made a natural phenomenon that science could understand and hence make more enjoyable and less damaging. Is that where the term ribbed for her pleasure came from? Yeah, I don't know. The destructive effects of sex, and they will pay in themselves the due penalty for their perversion, Romans chapter 1, in this view, were not inherent, but the consequence of repressive social institutions and religious superstition perpetuated by the ignorant and narrow-minded. Nature red of tooth and claw, ladies and gentlemen. In the 60s, cultural Marxism interpreted traditional limits on sexual behavior as the instruments of like they do everything else, the instruments of oppression and conformity, reinforcing the false consciousness that perpetuated the ruling class and its power. You can tell that to Bill Clinton. Breaking sexual taboos and experiencing sexual pleasure thus became acts of liberation, leading to self-fulfillment and personal freedom. Yeah, how's that turning out for you? Feminism embraced this notion of sexual liberation. The autonomy of women depended on their casting off the shackles of patriarchal misogyny, most evident in male control of women's sexuality. Our bodies, ourselves, became the battle cry. Women should have the equal power to choose sexual experiences and pleasure, and the unjust double standards it gave men but not women sexual autonomy should be discarded. In other words, men should not have sexual autonomy, only women. That's the new standard. It's the attempt to forcibly impose a matriarchal society. The biological differences between men and women, especially nature's subjection of women's bodies to the relentless imperatives of procreation, were now discarded as arbitrary, unjust impediments to women's freedom and autonomy. Did I mention that plummeting U.S. birth rate? This process was moved along by the new technologies of reliable birth control and accessible and safe abortion. War on children, in other words. In the ensuing decades, however, the malign consequences of sexual liberation became increasingly manifest. There are always consequences when man departs from God's ways. Proliferation of sexually transmitted diseases, the wider access to demeaning pornography, and the explosion of out-of-wedlock childbirth, and the attendant social dysfunctions that follow from children being raised without fathers. Even for more privileged women, there were psychological costs to be paid for contending with male sexual predators and absolving them of responsibility for their behavior, given that now men and women were equally in control of their sexual choices, and that the traditional mores once enshrining male responsibility, such as chivalry, had been dismissed as patronizing and sexist. But as the years passed, many women began to discover that there are indeed differences between men and women and their experiences of sex. Liberation did not lead to the sexual utopia of carefree and cost-free pleasure, but to the guilt, regret, and humiliation that follow being used as an object for somebody else's transient enjoyment. Nature red of tooth and claw, folks. The response to these ill effects was to create rules, and in other words, they instituted their own version of that which they so gleefully tore down. They created rules and codes designed to eliminate the negative consequences of sexual freedom while still trying to preserve the sexual freedom itself. But contrary to the assumptions of lawmakers who want to regulate sexual behavior, sex is not a game like tennis that can be pleasurable for the players provided the rules are followed. As Camille Paglia has pointed out, when it comes to sex, the more appropriate metaphor is to the old Roman arena, where there was no law. An act that is so physically and psychologically complicated that exposes our most intimate longings and hidden selves cannot be rationalized and made cost-free or its unpleasant effects neutralized by reducing it to a voluntary agreement, which the very language of that statute precludes any such thing, in which the terms and conditions are spelled out and followed as in a contract. A completely lopsided, unequal contract in which one party can retroactively abrogate it whenever they choose. And this is a war on sex, is what this, or an implicit promotion of lesbianism, I suppose, because by the language of this California statute, why would men ever, why would men not become celibate for the risk they are running? I mean, falsely or under any circumstances, accused of rape. This is meant to destroy heterosexuality. This is the ultimate goal, folks. If you just reason it through, that's where you come out. Shakespeare's Prospero is wiser. The strongest oaths are but straw to the fire in the blood. Faced with the cost of sexual liberation, contemporary feminism has betrayed its devotion to personal freedom and equality, choosing instead to demand that the state use its coercive power to protect women not just from insensitive men, but from the consequences of their own choices. Sexual harassment law is the most widespread expression of this impulse to use the tutelary state to defend women from a hostile and intimidating environment. The vulgar joke or boorish innuendo is now not just a violation of social decorum, but a crime subject to punishment. But nothing infantilizes women, nothing is more patronizing and sexist than the sexual codes promulgated by numerous universities. Obviously, sexual assault, properly defined, is a crime that should be investigated and the guilty punished. But getting drunk and then sleeping with an equally inebriated partner is not a crime. It's stupid, but it's not a crime. Or at least, well, now it is, I suppose. At the woman's whim. It's a learning, it should be a learning experience about taking responsibility for one's actions, practicing the virtues of prudence and self-control, but then those things were thrown out, excommunicated a long time ago, right? I mean, to bring those things back, they'd have to admit, yeah, we were wrong the whole time. Sexual revolution, everything going back half a century, we were wrong, our bad. Do you think they're ever going to do that? You'd be waiting a long time. Waiting a long time for that one, folks. By criminalizing young adults' complicated sexual experiences, feminism is betraying its original call for sexual equality and autonomy by making women perpetual victims too weak to be held responsible for their choices, and too incapable of painfully learning from their mistakes and thus developing their characters. So it's a war on character as well. At the same time that feminists still call for unlimited sexual freedom, they treat women as Victorian maidens who lack agency and resources of character, and thus must be defended against sexual cads and bounders, the very sexual cads and bounders that feminism encourages. As the Manhattan Institute's Heather McDonald puts it, this new order is a bizarre hybrid of liberationist and traditionalist values. It carefully preserves the prerogative of no-strings-attached sex while cabining it with legalistic caveats that allow females to revert at will to a stance of offended virtue. In other words, a one-way street and a, shall we say, highly matriarchal, anti-masculinist one. This strange demand for absolute freedom without responsibility is actually emblematic of the left, and is not just a symptom of feminism. It reaches into our broader culture. It has become the enabler of the entitlement state, which justifies its growing size and regulatory power over everybody else's lives by promising to protect them not just from the vicissitudes of life, but from the consequences of their own choices, even as they enjoy more freedom to make even more lousy choices. Thus, the feminist demand for government-subsidized birth control and abortion is of a piece with government bailouts for homeowners who overborrowed on the equity of their homes or lied on their mortgage applications. The demand for personal freedom without accountability contradicts the foundational philosophy of our republic. It always comes back around to the United States Constitution, folks. The right to liberty is not the right to be absolved from the consequences of one's actions. Taking that responsibility is what makes one worthy of freedom in the first place, and equal to others who likewise must be accountable for their actions. In other words, those who demand that they not be responsible for their own actions, that's the tyranny of the majority. A shortcut, a one-way street, as it were. Democratic freedom, that's small d, and equality are both compromised without responsibility and accountability. As Alexis de Tocqueville said about the necessity of self-reliance for democratic freedom, it profits me but little, after all, that a vigilant authority always protects the tranquility of my pleasures and constantly averts all dangers from my path without my care or concern, if this same authority is the absolute master of my liberty and my life. Precisely. Many Americans, including the feminists, the feminazis, have accepted the loss of freedom as the trade-off for shedding the burden of responsibility for their own lives, but I don't know, from where I'm standing, it seems like they have all the freedom. Okay, here's a media bias story, so get out the alligator clamps to hold your eyelids open. Or at least that's how media bias stories affect me, because it's so much a part of the background. I mean, it's so self-evident that I can't really get all that revved up about any media bias story. It's like the sky is blue. You may not like blue as a color for the sky, but guess what? Nitrogen atoms tend to reflect blue light more than longer wavelengths. So there you go. You got a blue sky. If you don't want to see a blue sky, move to my part of the country, and you'll never see blue sky again. Now, Jonah Goldberg, getting back to the G-file today, wrote the Happy Warrior column for the latest issue of National Review. It's all right for a column written in the lobby of a Homewood Suites in Charlotte, North Carolina. Goldberg doesn't want to hinder the onrush of newsstand sales, but the gist of it is that he thinks the OBA media, the entire liberal industrial complex, really is first and foremost about storytelling, not fact reporting. Facts that advance the story get prominence. Facts that don't remain undisclosed or downplayed. This is why the media has simply lost its mind about Elizabeth Loughton. Quote from that aforementioned Goldberg column. I don't mean to pile on Miss Loughton, who was forced to resign from her job over the firestorm, but she is not what one would call a big fish in Washington. She is, or rather was, the communications director of a little-known second-term Tennessee congressman. Plucking her out of obscurity for ritual sacrifice is a bit like some monarch dispatching soldiers to retrieve a girl from the hinterlands for a witch trial because she said something nefarious around the village well, close quote. But prosecuting witches is rarely about the witches, it's about the prosecutors. Anyway, Goldberg argues that the liberal story changes with the times. Sometimes it changes by the hour. But the underlying motivation or theme is what endures. Liberals are the good guys with double capital G's. This was a huge part of his argument in liberal fascism. The left believes it has a monopoly on political virtue and every manner of virtue. They're moral supremacists, after all. And therefore, the farther you get from the left, the closer you get to all bad things and all bad people. So, racists have to be exclusively right-wing. Ditto fascists, bullies, Sith lords, homophobes, sexists, racists, I already said racist, speciesists. For the storytellers, conservative isn't a description of a set of ideas, it's a description of things I don't like, and things we are brave rebels for opposing. For instance, I was reading Frank Rich's interview of Chris Rock recently, which has some interesting things in it, and some bat guano crazy things in it, but take a look at this. Quote, question, what do you make of the attempt to bar Bill Maher from speaking at Berkeley for his riff on Muslims? Answer, well, I love Bill, but I stopped playing colleges, and the reason is they're way too conservative. What? In their political views? Not in their political views. Not like they're voting Republican or anything horrible like that. But in their social views and their willingness not to offend anybody. This is Chris Rock, by the way, and I don't do a very good Chris Rock impression, so you just have to use your imagination. Kids raised on a culture of we're not going to keep score in the game because we don't want anybody to lose. Or just ignoring race to a fault. You can't say the black kid over there. No, it's the guy with the red shoes. You can't even be offensive on your way to being inoffensive. When did you start to notice this? About 8 years ago. Probably a couple of tours ago. It was just like, this is not as much fun as it used to be. I remember talking to George Carlin before he died and him saying the exact same thing. End quote. Now this is a really interesting insight about college culture and runs counter to the idea that campuses are hotbeds of pro-rape sentiment, by the way. But conservative? I totally understand what Chris Rock is saying, and in a sense he's right if you mean by conservative, prudential, cautious, etc. But let's not kid ourselves. It is not political conservatism that has created this climate. But the really hilarious part of the interview comes not from Chris Rock, but from Frank Rich. He thinks Dennis Miller isn't as funny as he used to be, and certainly not as funny as Jon Stewart or Bill Maher. Well, why? Well, Miller's politics have to be part of it, Rich concedes. Going deeper, he asks Chris Rock, do you think that identifying with those in power is an impediment to laughter? Yes, this just happened. Frank Rich, former New York Timesman, former Broadway hitmaker, current cheerleader for Barack Obama, and cosseted Praetorian of the liberal establishment, thinks that Dennis Miller is the guy identifying with those in power. Not Jon Stewart, not Bill Maher, Dennis Miller. When will these people realize that being liberal, particularly in the entertainment business, is literally the most cowardly, establishmentarian, stuffed, shirtedly conservative, in that context, and safest thing you can do? Funny part is that Frank Rich is right. Sucking up to power is deleterious to humor, unless you're really, really good at it, like Jon Stewart. This is why Saturday Night Live has been so politically unfunny for the bulk of the Obamanacy. And it's also why so much of the liberal establishment soiled itself when SNL actually ran a funny skit about Obama recently regarding the immigration proclamation. To the fact checkers, they cried, just like they didn't for 13 gajillion skits attacking various and sundry Republicans. As you already know, I'm sure, I'm of the school that Hillary Clinton is a wildly overrated candidate. She's dull, deliberate, politically slow-witted, and inarticulate off the cuff. As I often say, she's the lady who tells you, "Young man, there's no eating in the library." But that's just one man's opinion. It's one man's absolutely spot-on correct opinion, as a lot of otherwise or supposedly smart and serious people are going to find out over the next year and a half. But I'm not going to play this. I wouldn't have wanted to play it anyway because it just, I don't like country music. But apparently there is a Hillary Clinton country music video. And the song is entitled "Learnin' Hindsight's Always Right." Apparently you can find this at swh2016.com. If I don't know, if you want to increase your need for blood pressure medication. Now, there are many, 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 many problems with this Hillary Clinton country music video. It's like it was written by Willie Nelson and Wag the Dog, except that the Willie Nelson songs and Wag the Dog sound less like a parody. I mean, there's almost a Freudian slip in the lyric, "Stand up with Hillary." Maybe it's "Help Hillary stand up." I don't know. Although with those upside down legs, I don't know why she'd have a problem. But see, stand up is a comedy routine. Stand with is a call to solidarity. In North Korea, you can release videos showing the dear leader as a paladin riding a unicorn over a rainbow bridge into battle against a dragon and people will buy it. But seriously, who's going to buy this? It's so desperate, so discordant, so forced, it's like watching Mitch Daniels in a gangsta rap video. Earn your riches. Entitlement reform, bitches. I'm going to take it. I'm going to make it rain work incentives. I'm not sure how to create the syncopation for that. Maybe that's the point. Or Henry Kissinger in a cod piece with a bunch of babes twerking in the background, which actually, if you read The Ends of Power by H.R. Haldeman, that probably happened back in the Nixon and Ford years. yeah, Henry Kissinger was supposedly a real, let's just say he scored a lot. Because as I believe Dr. Kissinger himself once said, power is an aphrodisiac. Herr Haldeman. I guess he would have said, Herr Zontegeld to me. But I digress. I mean, is that funny? Well, sure, but it's also weird. It makes me feel vaguely unsafe, like I would if I were sitting next to a really flirty, inebriated, and profane Madeleine Albright on a long flight, or in other words, Madeleine, the way Madeleine Albright is all the time, actually. Madam Commissar, the sign says occupado! Let's just say it's not mind safe. Dull-witted. Not dull-witter. Dull-witted. Just to clarify what Lady Michelle apparently misheard in the chat room, and no, I was not talking about you. I'm talking about Hillary Rodham Clinton. The dull-witted, upside-down-legged alleged female who is never, ever even going to be the Democrat nominee for the presidency, much less reach the White House in her own right. Now, I haven't had anything to say about the Eric Garner grand jury furor. I don't know that Eric Garner can really compete with Michael Brown as far as sparking a nationwide race war, which now is including rioters literally running over police officers almost 1,000 miles away in Denver, Colorado, just because they're animals, folks. They're savages. They are. It's the ultimate. It's the biggest example yet of the psychological projection of the left. Because you will never see more hateful people than the Ferguson protesters. I don't even feel the need to expound at any great length about that point, because it speaks for itself more with each passing day. Whereas Eric Garner was a 43-year-old, 6'4", 350-pound, obese black man with heart disease, diabetes, other health problems, asthma, who also had a petty theft rap sheet longer than both his arms stacked end to end. Now, Jack Dunphy writes for National Review Online about law enforcement issues. I think he's a former cop for the LAPD, and he makes the case. He explains why the grand jury in Staten Island, which included almost half of that grand jury were non-whites, should be pointed out. And he makes the case for why, actually the New York police officers did not use excessive force in arresting Eric Garner. It's rare that I find myself on opposite sides of an issue from opposite sides of an issue from Charles Krauthammer, Dunphy writes. Such is my respect for his opinions that when I find myself differing with him, I ask where I've gone wrong, but not this time. Appearing Wednesday on the Fox News Channel's special report, Dr. Krauthammer was discussing the decision by a Staten Island grand jury not to indict an NYPD officer in the July 17th death of Eric Garner, a decision he described as totally incomprehensible. Well, I'm sorry, Dr. K, but I don't find it the least bit incomprehensible. Remember, Jack Dunphy knows whereof he speaks. Officer Daniel Pantaleo was one of the several officers involved in the incident, and it was he who grabbed Garner in what has often been described as a chokehold, which has been erroneously attributed as the cause of Garner's death. The medical examiner described it as a contributing factor. In the widely seen video of the arrest, Pantaleo can be seen with his arm around Garner's neck as Garner is taken to the ground and for some time thereafter, but in watching the video, it's difficult to determine whether Garner was in fact choked. And if he was, it did not appear it was long enough even to render him unconscious, much less kill him. In other words, it's all about the facts in a just examination of such case. Much has been made of Garner's pleas that he couldn't breathe as he was held on the ground, and in retrospect, those pleas are all the more disturbing to hear given what we know to have happened soon thereafter. But the fact that Garner was saying he could not breathe was in itself evidence that he could. For if he was truly unable to breathe, then neither could he have spoken. And as Garner was saying these words, neither Pantaleo nor any other officer was holding the man's neck. I saw nothing excessive in the manner in which the officers subdued Garner. He was neither beaten with batons nor even punched. To me, it appeared to be a fairly typical scuffle with a very large man who had clearly demonstrated his unwillingness to be arrested peacefully. Pantaleo and another plainclothes officer were the first to have contacted Garner, and they showed good judgment by waiting for additional officers to arrive before moving in for the arrest. But once Garner showed he would not be willingly handcuffed, things happened as they most often do in these situations. The cops grabbed whatever part of Garner they could and wrestled him to the ground. It happens every day in any large city you could name. Given Garner's medical condition, which included obesity, asthma, and high blood pressure, it seems very possible he would have died from the exertion of the scuffle in any case, even if no officer had touched his neck at all. Where I do find fault with the officers is in their failure to bring Garner to a seated position as soon as they had him under control. Police trainers have long been aware of a phenomenon known as positional asphyxia, in which a person subdued as Garner was can die if left lying in a prone position for too long. Obese people are known to be at greater risk of this condition than others. The civil case to follow will likely rest on this lapse as much as it does on the use of force itself. One reason that Dr. Krauthammer and so many others are expressing their shock at the grand jury's decision is the triviality of the crime for which the officers sought to arrest Garner. And that gets to my point about this whole thing. Selling individual untaxed cigarettes on the street. It's unfortunate that NYPD officers have been pressed into service as enforcers for the nanny state that New York City has become, but don't put a law on the books if you don't want the cops to enforce it. Don't ask them to enforce it if you're not willing to accept the fact that violence will sometimes occur when people resist that enforcement. Now, here again, we have a case, first of all, where the arrestee in question resisted arrest. And guess what? The arrestee in question was a very large man. Now, he wasn't the physical specimen that Michael Brown was. Michael Brown was 6'4", 292 pounds. He was 18 years old. I mean, he was NFL nose tackle size. Now, I suppose there are NFL defensive linemen, and offensive linemen for that matter, who look more like Eric Garner did. Eric Garner was 43 years old, so he is what Michael Brown might have become if he'd lived 25 years longer. That's probably a very likely outcome, or would have been a likely outcome. But he's still a huge man, much larger than the average person. And so if you're charged with arresting such a large man, whatever his color, whatever his ethnicity, and you're average sized, you're going to have a problem, aren't you? And if you can't use your nightstick, and if you're constrained to use only the amount of physicality necessary to reasonably subdue the suspect in question, then if you can't use a nightstick and you don't want him to use a gun, then what else do you have? You got to gang tackle him, which would not have been necessary if he had not resisted arrest. This is what we got to come back around to with these things, folks. Michael Brown would be alive today if he had done what Officer Darren Wilson told him to do. Period. He will be alive today. Darren Wilson didn't want to shoot Michael Brown. Darren Wilson was trying to save his life, because Michael Brown was trying to take his life. Now, the Eric Garner incident it wasn't life or death. Eric Garner wasn't trying to kill anybody, but he was resisting arrest. So, that has got to be taken into account. If Eric Garner hadn't resisted arrest, then he'd be alive today. Or at least if he wasn't alive today, it wouldn't have been because of anything that happened in that arrest. But then we get to the reason, what he was suspected to have done: selling untaxed cigarettes. In other words, Mayor Michael Bloomberg killed Eric Garner. Because if the left in the Big Apple, in Gotham, if you will, had not turned tobacco into contraband, into a veritable controlled substance, even while they are legalizing marijuana everywhere, seemingly, even though marijuana imparts 4 times the amount of tar into its smokers' and tokers' lungs as does tobacco, we should hasten to add, then there would have been no reason to approach Eric Garner in the first place. Although, Eric Garner probably would have found something else illicit to do, but I guess we'll never know that now, will we? Because he was put in the position of being a suspect for something that really shouldn't be illegal at all. That's it. Thank you. We're done. Saturday afternoon extravaganza, 19 hours and 2 minutes at blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review. We'll see you on Monday.